I inherited $42 million from an aunt I barely remembered, and before I claimed a single cent, I ran one final test on the family that spent 30 years treating me like a stain on their reputation. I sat in the cold lobby of an urgent care clinic in Tacoma at 11 at night and dialed my mother, gasping into the phone that a drunk driver had hit my car and the ER needed $1,200 before they could even x-ray my ribs. What she said to me in the next 90 seconds ended a lifetime of begging for her approval. But what my brother's wife did 45 minutes later is the reason I am alive, wealthy, and finally free. My name is Delaney. I am 31 years old, and I work as a freelance wedding photographer. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever been the family scapegoat while some golden sibling got every dollar and every ounce of love. Hit that subscribe button so more people like us can find stories like this one. I grew up in a sprawling colonial house on Mercer Island, one of those zip codes where mothers compete over their daughters' college acceptance letters and the cars in the driveway. To the neighbors, we looked like a magazine spread. Inside, I was the punchline. My mother, Regina, treated the Bellevue Yacht Club like a second religion, and my older sister, Courtney, was the chosen apostle. Courtney was the lacrosse captain, the homecoming queen, the marketing executive with the Nordstrom wardrobe and the downtown loft. I was the daughter who asked for a camera at 12, who studied photography instead of pre-law, and who paid for her own art school, while my parents wrote Courtney a check for her MBA. That rainy Tuesday night, I wasn't actually hurt. There was no drunk driver, no cracked ribs, no emergency at all. I was sitting on a cold plastic chair in an empty urgent care waiting room because I needed somewhere quiet with fluorescent lights to make my voice sound believable. In the inner zipper pocket of my second-hand Patagonia jacket was a certified letter from a probate attorney in Sacramento. My Aunt Marguerite, my father's estranged sister who I had met exactly twice as a child, had died in August and left her entire estate to me. $42 million after taxes. No one else in the family knew she had any money at all. She lived in a modest ranch house in the Central Valley, drove a 15-year-old Camry, and made her fortune quietly investing in agricultural land that tripled when Silicon Valley companies started buying up farms for data centers. I had kept the secret for 11 days. Before I picked up that inheritance and changed my life forever, I needed to know one thing. I needed to know what the people who shared my blood would do if I called them in the middle of the night, broken and scared, asking for help. So I dialed my mother. She answered on the fourth ring with a sigh that I felt in my teeth. Delaney, it is almost 11. This had better be important. I am hosting the club's silent auction committee in the morning. I forced my voice into a ragged whisper, made myself cry real tears by thinking about my dog who died last year, and told her a drunk driver had T-boned me on I-5, that I was in the urgent care waiting for a transfer to Tacoma General, that they needed $1,200 on a card before they would do any imaging, and that my health insurance had lapsed because a client's check bounced. I told her I was scared. I told her my hands were shaking. I told her, please, Mama. There was a silence on the other end that lasted maybe 4 seconds, and in those 4 seconds I heard every Thanksgiving she seated me at the kids' table after I turned 25, every graduation she skipped, because Courtney had a work thing, every birthday I spent alone in my apartment because she forgot to call. Then she laughed. She actually laughed, short and sharp like she had caught me stealing. Delaney, sweetheart, this is exactly what I warned you about when you decided photography was a career. You want to live like a bohemian. You get to pay bohemian hospital bills. I am not bailing you out at midnight because you couldn't be bothered to keep a real insurance policy. Figure it out. You are a grown woman. And if you are calling me from a hospital bed because some uninsured idiot hit you, well, maybe next time you will think twice about driving that ridiculous little Subaru instead of something safe. The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there with the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the silence, and something cracked open inside me that I don't think will ever close again. I tried my sister next. Courtney let it ring twice and sent me to voicemail, and then a text came through almost immediately. In a client dinner at Canlis, can't talk, if it's really an emergency call 911 lol. Lol. My sister sent me the letters LOL while I was supposedly bleeding internally in a hospital 2 hours from her condo. I put the phone down on my lap and watched rain slide down the lobby window in long gray lines, and I thought, okay, I have my answer. These are the people I spent 31 years trying to please. I was zipping my jacket to leave when the automatic doors whooshed open and a gust of wet November air blew through the lobby. Priya came in at almost a run, her nurse's scrubs soaked dark at the shoulders, her black hair plastered to her forehead, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. She was my brother, Holden's wife, a pediatric ICU nurse at Seattle Children's, and she lived in Everett, a solid hour and a half north of where I was sitting. She scanned the waiting room, saw me, and her whole body sagged with relief. She ran across the tile and dropped to her knees in front of my chair and grabbed both my hands. Delaney, oh my God, are you okay? Are they taking you back soon? Have they done a CT yet? Her voice tumbled out fast and professional, the way nurses talk in emergencies. I just kept staring at her. She was shivering. Her scrubs were soaked through. She must have driven straight from the end of her shift without even going home to change. Honey, she said. And then she let go of my hands and unzipped a soft-sided lunch bag she had slung over her shoulder and pulled out a battered envelope. There is $640 in there. It's everything I had saved in my tip jar from the weekend shifts. And here, she handed me a credit card, so worn the numbers had half rubbed off. This one has about $400 left on it. I called the balance from the car. That should cover the $1,200. Please just go give it to the front desk before they send you somewhere more expensive. I looked at that scratched-up credit card, and I looked at Priya's hands which were red and raw from the cold, and I felt something physical happen in my chest. Priya, I said as gently as I could, why do you only have $400 of credit on one card? You're a senior nurse. She looked away. Her jaw worked. Holden manages our money, she said. He says I'm bad with numbers. My paychecks go into a joint account he has access to, and he gives me a Friday allowance for gas and groceries. If I go over, she stopped, pressed her lips together, and we have a conversation about it. She said the word conversation, the way people say the word surgery. I already knew my brother was a controlling jerk. He was a commercial real estate broker down in Bellevue who wore $3,000 suits and talked about his wife like she was a houseplant he was patiently keeping alive. What I didn't know until that moment was how deep it ran. I asked her how she got down here so fast. She said she had texted Holden that she was picking up a double shift at the hospital. She said she drove through standing water on I-5 inches, a 2009 Hyundai with wipers that barely worked because she couldn't let me die alone in a waiting room. She said if Holden checked her car's mileage tomorrow, she would tell him she took the long way home because of an accident on the highway. Then she reached up and touched a thin gold chain around her neck with a small pendant that looked like a coin. She said if the credit card declined, she could pawn the chain. It was her grandmother's from Mumbai. She had been saving it for a daughter she didn't have yet. But a daughter she didn't have couldn't help me tonight, and I could. I closed my hand around Priya's, and I pushed the envelope and the sad worn credit card back into her bag. Priya, listen to me, I said, and I made my voice as steady as I could. I don't need it. While you were driving the hospital, billing manager came out and told me there was a clerical error with my insurance. They found the lapse was on their end. They're covering everything. The surgery, if I even need one, is paid for. I'm going to be fine. I just need you to go home, get warm, and please do not tell Holden where you were tonight. If he asks about the mileage, tell him the bridge was out. Tell him anything. She cried a little. She hugged me. She stood up in her wet, squeaking sneakers and walked back out into the rain, and I watched her Hyundai pull out of the lot with the right headlight flickering. The second her taillights disappeared, I stood up. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat in that empty lot, and I pulled the probate attorney's letter out of my jacket. $42 million. I stared at that number for a long time. If I had taken that money and moved to the coast and disappeared, the way I'd been fantasizing for a week, Holden would keep grinding Priya down until there was nothing of her left. My mother would keep preening at her charity auctions. Courtney would keep being the golden girl on a pile of something I didn't yet understand. And the last kind person in my blood family, the one who drove through a flood with her last $600, would be collateral damage. So, I made a different plan. I called a wealth attorney in downtown Seattle the next morning, a woman named Meredith Voss who came recommended through an old photography client whose startup she had restructured. I told her everything: the inheritance, the phone calls, the mileage Holden tracked on Priya's car. I told her I wanted to claim the inheritance through an anonymous holding entity, and I wanted a forensic financial investigation into my mother, my sister, and my brother. I had an unlimited budget. I wanted it done in 3 weeks. She didn't blink. She said she had a team, and she asked me what my deadline was. I told her Thanksgiving. My mother was hosting. I wanted the entire extended family there. 3 weeks and 4 days later, I drove my dented Outback up the long circular driveway of my mother's house on Mercer Island. I parked between Courtney's white Range Rover and Holden's black G-Wagon, a deliberate choice. I wore the clothes my family expected me to wear: a thrifted sweater with a small mend at the elbow, jeans that had gone soft at the knees, beat-up Blundstones. I wanted to walk in looking exactly like the embarrassment they believed I was. When I rang the bell, my mother opened it, took one look at me, and wrinkled her nose like I had come to deliver a package. "Delaney," she said, "for God's sake, go around back and come in through the kitchen. I have white carpet, and Priya needs help in there. She is in over her head as usual." I walked around the side path. The kitchen was a war zone of half-chopped vegetables and a turkey the size of a toddler, and Priya was standing at the island in a stained apron, moving a mile a minute. When she saw me, her whole face opened up. I crossed the room and hugged her, and felt her shoulder blades through the cotton. She was thinner than she had been at the clinic. I asked her quietly if she was doing okay. She said she had been trying to leave. She said she had looked at a studio apartment 2 weeks ago, and Holden had found the browser history on her phone and taken the phone away for 6 days. She said she had hidden a duffel bag with some clothes in the trunk of her car, but Holden had cleaned her car last weekend and found it and had a conversation with her. She said the word conversation again, and this time her hand moved to her upper arm. Courtney glided into the kitchen in a cream silk blouse holding a glass of champagne. "Oh, Delaney, look at you," she said, laughing. "You came. I told Mom you probably couldn't afford the gas. Still not married. Still not homeowning. Still taking pictures of other people's weddings. Bless your heart." My mother came in behind her holding an empty wine glass and handed it to Priya without looking at her. She told me I should be grateful to even be invited after my dramatic hospital performance in November, which apparently had gotten back to her. Courtney had told her. Of course she had. Dinner was carefully staged humiliation. My mother sat at one end, my father dozing at the other with a scotch, Holden to his right like a young prince, Courtney across from him, and I was put on a fold-out chair wedged between Priya and the sideboard. The moment we all sat down, Courtney tapped her champagne flute with a fork. She announced that since she knew how strapped I was, she had taken the liberty of ordering the entire appetizer spread from a caterer in Medina, charcuterie and oysters and some kind of truffle arrangement, so that Priya wouldn't have to do it all. Then she slid a folded receipt across the table to me. She said, "I figured the least you could do after that embarrassing midnight phone call to Mom was pitch in for the starters. Think of it as your way of apologizing for wasting her time." The receipt was for $1,840. Holden laughed. Dad kept dozing. My mother watched me carefully, waiting to see if I would crack. Priya stared at her plate. I picked up the receipt, I folded it in half, and I slid it back across the linen runner until it rested in front of Courtney's plate. I said, quietly, "I am not paying for food I didn't order, while the woman who cooked the actual meal has been on her feet since 6 in the morning. If you wanted to play hostess, pay for it yourself." My mother set her wine glass down hard enough that the stem rang. She told me if I could not behave like a civilized adult, I could leave her house right now, or she could call the police and have me escorted off her property. I would be in the local paper by morning. Do not test me, Delaney. I saw Priya flinch every time Regina raised her voice. I nodded slowly. I put my hands in my lap. I said, "Okay, I am sorry for disrupting. and I let my mother think she had won. Then Holden took a bite of the turkey Priya had cooked and spit it into his napkin. He said, "Jesus, Priya, this is a mouthful of sand. You had one job." He turned to my mother and said, "You know what I had to do last week? I had to cancel her car insurance." She drove a ridiculous number of miles on some mystery errand, and when I asked her where she'd been, she lied to me. So until she learns to respect our budget, she can take the 512 bus to the hospital. My mother laughed approvingly and said, "Good. A woman needs structure." Courtney added, "Maybe if you took the bus more, Delaney, you'd lose that 5 pounds." Priya was staring at her plate and her hand was shaking on her fork, and I felt a white-hot rage climb up the back of my neck. But I kept my face still. The trap was already set. I just had to let them walk into it. My mother cleared her throat and reached under her chair and produced a manila folder, which she slid down the table to me. "Speaking of family business," she said, "we have something to settle tonight." I opened it. It was a quitclaim deed for the 26 acres of wooded land outside of Snoqualmie that my father had put in my name when I was 18, his version of a college fund after my mother refused to pay for art school. It was my only asset. It was where I had camped as a kid, where my dad and I had watched meteor showers. Courtney leaned forward. She said, "Look, Del, I know you've been struggling, and my firm needs a tax write-off for our Q4. I'm willing to take that worthless patch of forest off your hands. All you have to do is sign here. I'll give you $3,000 cash for your trouble. Call it even." She pushed a pen at me. I looked at the deed. I looked at my sister. And I thought, why does an executive at a commercial real estate firm want 26 acres of forest land? And then my mother made the mistake that told me everything. She said, "If you do not sign that paper, Delaney, I have a very hard decision to make. Because my mother's emerald bracelet, the one your grandmother left me, is missing from my jewelry box. And Priya has been upstairs all afternoon." Priya's fork clattered. She looked up with her mouth open. "Regina," she said, "I have been in this kitchen since breakfast. I have not been upstairs." My mother didn't even look at her. She said, "The police will believe me, Priya. A felony theft charge will end your nursing license. You will be deported if we push hard enough. Sign the deed, Delaney, and my bracelet will turn out to have been in a different drawer." The cruelty was so breathtaking. I almost laughed. My own mother, my brother, and my sister had conspired to frame the only good person at the table on a fabricated felony to extort a piece of forest from me. I let my shoulders drop. I made my voice small. I said I would sign, but I wanted to take it to a free legal clinic first, just 3 days. I couldn't afford a surprise tax bill. Courtney rolled her eyes but agreed. We set a meeting for Wednesday at noon at Courtney's office in South Lake Union. I took the folder, I hugged Priya at the back door, and I drove straight to Meredith Voss's office downtown, with the rain coming down so hard I had to slow to 20 on the bridge. Meredith was already in her conference room with 3 binders stacked on the table. Binder 1 was Courtney. My sister had not closed a residential sale in 14 months. Her Range Rover was 2 payments from repossession. She was $310,000 in revolving credit card debt. And she was under active IRS audit for filing fraudulent business expense deductions 3 years running, somewhere in the neighborhood of $250,000 in falsified write-offs. The IRS investigator had flagged the case for potential criminal referral in the last 6 months. Courtney was not a successful executive. Courtney was a woman in a silk blouse 12 months from federal prison. Binder 2 was Holden. My brother was not a savvy real estate broker. My brother was a day trader on margin who had lost everything, including his broker accounts, chasing options plays that went the wrong way. He had been using his role as the trustee on our mother's revocable trust to quietly take out loans against her house. $450,000 on a second mortgage, with my mother's signature forged on the paperwork. He was already 3 months behind on payments. The bank had issued a pre-foreclosure notice. Holden was intercepting the mail. He had also, and this was the part where my hand closed into a fist on the conference table, been routing Priya's paychecks into an offshore account in the Caymans under his name only, not a joint account. His. Every shift she worked at the children's hospital, every IV she started on a sick kid, every double she pulled, went into an account she couldn't see and couldn't touch, and he was using it to chase margin calls. Binder 3 was the reason Courtney wanted 26 acres of forest. Meredith laid the zoning blueprints out across the table. 6 months ago, a semiconductor manufacturer had quietly signed a letter of intent with the county to build a $2 billion fabrication plant on the land bordering my parcel. My 26 acres were the only viable access corridor to the state highway. The company had contacted Courtney through her firm 3 months ago, assuming she represented the family estate. They had offered her $6.4 million for my land. She had countersigned a non-disclosure and was in the middle of negotiating with them, planning to pay me $3,000, sign my name on a quitclaim, and pocket the difference. The closing, if she pulled it off, would have solved her IRS problem and left her with more than $4 million in clear profit. I told Meredith to call the semiconductor company directly that afternoon and inform their acquisitions director that the actual legal owner was sitting in her office and was prepared to walk away entirely unless they came up to $8 million. She raised an eyebrow. She made the call. By 6 that evening we had a term sheet. By Tuesday morning the wire hit an account under Evergreen Pivot LLC, my anonymous holding entity, $8 million. And I still had the $42 million waiting in probate, which Meredith had already begun claiming under the same entity. Tuesday night, my phone rang at 11:40. It was Priya, whispering, her voice thin with panic. Holden had come home drunk. He had left his phone on the counter, and she had seen a text thread with a woman named Bethany, months of it, rent receipts for an apartment in Belltown that he was paying with what Priya now realized was her money. She had confronted him. He had grabbed her by the hair, dragged her to the front door, thrown her out in her scrubs with no shoes, and locked the deadbolt. She was sitting on the curb 2 blocks down, barefoot, in 40-degree rain, with a dying phone. I told her not to move. I was in the car in 90 seconds. I had, 2 days earlier, bought a black armored SUV through Evergreen Pivot, the kind of vehicle my photography clients' tech exec husbands bought when they got death threats. I drove it up I-5 at 85 miles an hour. I found her huddled under a streetlight in front of a cul-de-sac sign, her hair wet, her feet blue. I wrapped her in a cashmere blanket I had in the back seat. I put her in the passenger seat with the heated seat on high, and I drove her not to my apartment but to the Four Seasons downtown. I booked the presidential suite on a corporate card. Priya walked into that suite and just stood there staring at the lake view. She asked me, "Whose money is this?" I told her, "Sit down, eat, take a bath, sleep in a real bed. We will talk in the morning." She slept 14 hours. I watched the sun come up over Elliott Bay, and I finalized the divorce petition Meredith had drafted. Wednesday at noon, I walked into Courtney's South Lake Union office with Priya beside me. Priya was wearing an emerald green dress and black heels a stylist had brought to the hotel that morning, and her hair was pulled back, and she looked 10 years younger and about 1,000 miles from the woman in the stained apron. My mother was at the conference table already. Courtney was fidgeting with her pen. Holden was standing by the window in a pressed suit, and when he saw Priya walk in behind me, his face went through about 4 different colors. "Where the hell have you been?" he said. "And what are you wearing?" Priya didn't answer. She sat down next to me and folded her hands on the table. My mother rapped the table and said, "Enough, let's do this. Pick up the pen, Delaney." I slid the deed back toward Courtney instead. I said, "Before I sign anything, Courtney, I have one question. What's the name of the LLC that's actually buying my property?" Courtney's face went chalk. I said, "Is it one of the shell entities the IRS is looking into, or is it a new one?" She opened her mouth and nothing came out. My mother said, "What is she talking about?" I said, "Your perfect daughter hasn't sold a house in over a year. She has $300,000 in credit card debt, her car is about to be repossessed, and she is under active federal investigation for tax fraud. She wanted my land to sell to a chip manufacturer who offered her $6.4 million so she could pay off the IRS and avoid prison." I slid the blueprints across the table. "And by the way, I sold it to them yesterday morning. For $8. In cash. You get nothing." Courtney made a noise I will remember my entire life. It was not a scream, it was not a sob, it was something between. She put her head down on the table. My mother stared at her, and I watched her maternal instinct calculate, and I watched her decide. She said, "Courtney, if you are under federal audit, I cannot be associated with you. I have the club membership to think about." Holden nodded quickly. "Mom's right," he said. "You need to keep your distance." He smiled at me across the table. "Okay. Delaney, you got lucky with some dirt," he said. "Enjoy your moment. But don't forget, Mom's estate is mine. I am the trustee. You are getting nothing when she is gone. So congratulations on your consolation prize. And Priya honey, when I file for divorce you are getting nothing too, because there's nothing to get." I looked at him for a long moment and I said, "Are you sure about that, Holden?" I opened the second binder. I told my mother there was no house for her to go back to. That Holden had forged her signature on a second mortgage for $450,000 to cover margin calls on options trades he was losing, that he had been defaulting for 90 days, that the bank had already begun foreclosure, and that he had been intercepting the certified mail. My mother picked up the mortgage paperwork. She looked at her own forged signature. She looked at her son. Her mouth moved but no sound came out. I told her about the offshore account. I told her about Priya's paychecks. I told her about Bethany's apartment. And then I told her that on Monday afternoon, Evergreen Pivot LLC had purchased her house out of the pre-foreclosure auction, outright, in cash, at a premium, because the bank was motivated and I had the liquidity. I slid the certified bank statement across the table. $63 million. She read it 3 times. "You can't afford a house like mine," she whispered. I said, "Mom, I am Evergreen Pivot. I am the owner of your house." My Aunt Marguerite, the sister Dad hasn't spoken to in 20 years because she told him once that Regina was a snake, left me $42 million in August. I added 8 more yesterday. Holden's loan default handed me your estate. Your beautiful life, Mother, is mine now. On paper, notarized, filed. She dropped to her knees on the carpet. I had never in my life seen her on her knees. She was crawling toward me, grabbing at the hem of my sweater, crying, saying, "Delaney, baby, I didn't mean any of it. I was just pushing you. I love you, please. Where will I go? Where will I live?" Courtney was crying into her arms. Holden was staring at the floor. Priya was still and composed beside me. I looked down at my mother, and I felt nothing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even satisfied. There was just a quiet space where 31 years of wanting her love used to be. I said, "You have 48 hours to pack your personal items. My security team will be at the house on Friday at noon. If one fixture is missing, one chandelier, one appliance, you will be charged with felony vandalism of my property." I looked at Courtney. I looked at Holden. I said, "The receptionist has already called building security. They are coming up to escort you out of this building now." Then I turned to Holden, and I slid a blue folder across the table. I said, "This is a divorce petition my attorney drafted last night. You are going to sign it. You are going to liquidate the Cayman account and return every dollar of Priya's stolen wages. You are going to surrender any claim to her future income. Or I walk a binder of evidence into the Seattle field office of the FBI this afternoon, and you will be indicted on wire fraud and felony forgery by the end of next week, and you will not see a day outside of a federal prison for 15 years. Sign the paper." He signed the paper. Security arrived. They walked all 3 of them down the long carpeted hallway and through the lobby and out onto the sidewalk in front of the Amazon spheres, in view of maybe 300 tech workers on their lunch break. A few people filmed it on their phones. I took Priya to a booth at a quiet restaurant on the water that afternoon. I slid a leather folio across the table to her. Inside was the deed to a 2-bedroom condo on Queen Anne, fully paid off, with property taxes prepaid for 30 years, and a separate document creating an irrevocable trust funded with $4 million, naming her as sole beneficiary. structured so that no court and no ex-husband could ever touch a penny. She stared at the papers. She said, "Delaney, I can't take this." I said, "Priya, you drove through a flood with the last $600 you had to help a sister-in-law you barely knew. You offered to pawn your grandmother's necklace. You are the only person in my blood family, legal or otherwise, who treated me like I was worth saving when I had nothing to offer. This isn't a gift. This is what you are owed." She put her face in her hands and she cried the way a person cries when a door they didn't know was locked finally opens. A year later, Priya is a charge nurse at a different hospital. She bought a rescue greyhound named Biscuit, and she is dating a kind pediatrician named Theo, who I introduced her to at a wedding I photographed. Courtney took a plea deal, 18 months federal. She is out now and working at a car dealership in Spokane. Holden did not take a plea. He is in Sheridan Federal Correctional. 5 more years on his sentence. My mother lives in a 1-bedroom apartment in Kent and works part-time at a consignment shop. She sends me cards on my birthday, which I have not opened. I bought my Aunt Marguerite's ranch house in the Central Valley, and I spend 6 months a year there, taking photographs of the almond orchards at dawn. I thought for a long time the 42 million was the point. It wasn't. The point was that I finally understood family is not the people whose DNA you share. Family is the person who shows up soaked in the rain with their last $600 because they could not live with themselves if you died alone. Everything after that is just paperwork. Have you ever had a stranger or an in-law treat you better than your own blood? Tell me in the comments. Like and subscribe if this one hit home. And remember, the loudest revenge is the one you never have to say out loud.